All right, so we're going to get you started, though, on Hurricane Idalia and just give you some live pictures of what we're looking at. Again, it hit what they call the Big Bend area of Florida, which is a place that usually does not get a lot of hurricane activity. This is tied in strength with a hurricane from back in 1896 that hit that area of where the Panhandle and the Peninsula meet. And it hit as a Category 3 storm at about 7:45 this morning. Storm surge in Tampa, as you saw at the top of the show. You're now looking at Steinhatchee, Florida, which actually bore the brunt of when the hurricane made landfall this morning. And it has now started to move off into parts of Georgia, heading towards South Carolina as well. We do know that the president is going to be speaking at about 1:45 this afternoon, talking about the evacuation plans and also some of the cleanup plans that they're already going to be putting in place from the federal government to help down in Florida. People were encouraged to evacuate. The area where the hurricane made landfall is actually not a very largely populous area. Just about 130,000 people in the 5 counties that they're saying of where that hurricane hit land. But as you see that we are looking at live pictures actually from Jacksonville, that's our sister station, WJXT, people that are looking at damage that we can see right now in Florida as this is moving through. I want to get to the latest report from reporter Jeff Patterson. He's in Cedar Key, Florida for us with the very latest on the hurricane.
I want to take you outside. I want to show you what's going on. Right now, you're looking at images from the faraway inn here in Cedar Key. You can see the water pouring out of that window there. The glass broke out maybe an hour or two ago. And then if we pan left, if Joey Capistrano, the photographer here, can pan left, what you're seeing is debris that maybe an hour or so ago was a building. That's the roof of the building. There's some furniture that you can see there that was inside of the building. A front door there, that blue item that you saw there was a front door. We've noticed that there's been some coolers that have been floating by, some kayaks that have floated by. At one point during the course of the night, we saw an entire dock float by, but then when the building here at the faraway inn kind of disintegrated in front of us, we knew then things were getting really bad on the buildings that are the closest to the Gulf of Mexico. And as Joey was zoomed in there on that telephone pole that is there at the end of the street, there's a gauge there that shows the storm surge. And we've been keeping a real close eye on that overnight. It has hung in around 9 or 10 feet here for the last hour or so. I was told by Cedar Key Fire Rescue that we could expect the storm surge to get above 16 feet. But we have seen it just kind of hanging around 10 feet. We know that the tide is going to start to come up here over the next several hours. We're going to toss it back to you guys in the studio, and we're keeping a close eye on things here in Cedar Key.
All right. Hey, thanks so much, Jeff. And again, we're going to make sure that you keep posted on what's happening as the storm moves through Florida now into Georgia. Joining me now is Jonathan Kagis, a meteorologist at our sister station in Orlando. Hey, Jonathan, thanks for joining me. And give us a sense of where things stand right now with the path of the storm.
Yeah, so as you mentioned before, Florida's done at least with the brunt of the storm itself. It's now moving into Georgia. You kind of mentioned it as well. The wind is still cranked out, but now we're still watching for the tide to come up. So it's kind of counterintuitive. The storm is gone, at least from a sense from the center, but those tides tonight that we're really watching on the Gulf Coast, even on the Atlantic side, you mentioned, I heard earlier in the show, we talked about the full moon and those higher tides. That is all going to play a role even though the storm is over. So we're still going to be watching the tide issue, that coastal flood issue, even though the storm is long gone. Now, the main part of that storm is going right on through. Still a Category 1 hurricane. It was moving really fast when it came ashore. These storms, when they're moving fast like that, they can hold their intensity for a little bit longer further inland. So still dealing with hurricane force winds well inland through southern Georgia right now.
Yeah, Jonathan, when you guys go ahead and take a look at the projections of a track of a storm, and when you think about the potential for damage and what you're seeing in terms of the pictures right now that we're seeing, does that line up with what the predictions were and what you think that we should be seeing?
Yeah, it really does. Some of the stuff we had, one of our reporters actually in Taylor County, about 20 miles inland. We wanted to make sure that they weren't near the coast where this came through because, as we just heard, the surge forecast was so high at about 12 to 16 feet. We lost his feed during some of the live shots that he was doing for us. They were well in a well-protected area, but we saw building or the roofs being peeled off the buildings. The iconic when the wind gets up under the roof, they kind of peel off like that. So very consistent. You mentioned earlier that it was a Cat 4. It was going through what we call an eye wall replacement cycle. What they do, they kind of tear down their inner eye, is that iconic eye, and it wraps around a bigger eye wall. So it was trying to weaken a little bit. That's what happens when these replacement cycles happen, to get stronger. It did hit lands. We never had that opportunity to get even stronger. But nonetheless, a very powerful Category 3 hurricane. Certainly some of the initial images and initial video that we're seeing, very consistent with a major hurricane making landfall for sure.
So it was interesting to me to read that this area, this Big Bend area, and again, hey, we're in Detroit, and you know, a lot of us, we have family down in Florida. We like to visit places in Florida. I was surprised to hear that not many hurricanes hit that area. Can you kind of give us a little bit of history about maybe why that area usually isn't touched?
Absolutely, and it's all about the steering currents. Typically, you either get storms to lift out of the Caribbean and north, kind of like what Michael did. It hit close to where this one did, but it was on the other side. It was towards the Panhandle, closer to Mexico Beach. Or you get these storms that come later in the season that lift out of the Caribbean and then get cold fronts, dips in the jet stream to kind of force them over, kind of like what Ian did last year, how it hit more southwest Florida, or Charlie back in 2004 when it made that super right turn into the same area that Ian did. Or of course you get the ones kind of like Andrew, the ones that roll off of Africa, hit southwest Florida, and then maybe kind of curve up towards the North Gulf Coast or go over back towards Texas. What made this one weird was Hurricane Franklin. You may have seen this huge, giant, also Category 4 hurricane way out in between the United States and Bermuda. What was happening there was that strong storm was actually fueling this big ridge of high pressure that was hanging out over Cuba. It created this bubble of protection for southwest Florida, but as it kind of forced the hurricane away from southwest Florida, it was guiding it right to the Big Bend. So we typically don't have a big hurricane kind of in the eastern Atlantic or in between the U.S. and Bermuda, and on the west coast of Florida, the Gulf Coast of Florida. So it was kind of Franklin getting real big and strong, pumping up that little extra steering current to make this one so weird and so atypical. And as you mentioned, doesn't happen all the time. It's the first time a major hurricane made landfall again in that Appalachia Bay there on that part of the Big Bend. Just crazy, crazy stuff.
All right. Hey, Jonathan, last question for you. Give us a sense of what you're expecting in the next 24 hours or so in terms of flooding, surging, and we talked about the full moon and how that might impact things.
Yeah, so we're really going to watch. It's weird, and I hope people have been paying attention, because they might have the all clear, hey, the storm is gone, the winds are going to start to die down. But as we get the full moon, of course, that has a lot to do. It makes our tides astronomically. When we have the supermoon like this, and we get that higher than normal astronomical tide, when you still have the wind direction coming in that direction to kind of give that a little extra push, we're going to see those higher than normal tides. This is going to be really, really bad, especially for places like Charleston, South Carolina. If you're familiar with that, it floods when there's not a lot going on. When we have those regular astronomical tides a lot, and we are going to have those onshore winds coming towards Charleston, South Carolina, and of course, still in the North Gulf Coast of the U.S., especially Florida, that was just impacted today. So those astronomical high tides just adding insult to injury to what those poor people just went through on the northern Gulf Coast this morning.
All right, well, we're going to keep watching it. Jonathan Kagas, our meteorologist in Orlando. Thanks so much for the time and the context. We really appreciate it. Now we're going to let you get back to work.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, you take care.